Welcome. Thank you for joining us, and always appreciate your comments. And I have to tell you, I am really curious, though. I see a good number of people following this on Facebook, just wondering if how much of it you watch, if you watch the entire thing, if that's the curiosity that I have, because of course, actually being with us together in the moment is so different from watching it sort of streaming, and it's hard to say. And of course, you are most welcome. But love hearing from you and having a chance to, you know, interrelate. Let me see where I am on the screen share and get started on here. And we'll go ahead with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So again, yesterday we read perhaps one of the most important sections. I had so much information that is considered to be very foundational. And if you didn't see yesterday's session, please do check it out. So Moses is going on. And again, these early passages in Deuteronomy, Moses is trying to encourage us. Certainly he's encouraging the Israelites, but of course I really see this as literature. I see it as speaking to us now and trying to help us gain a perspective on reality. And I think literature does, in fact, do that. So, Hishamer lecha. So he's saying, be careful, right? Watch yourselves. Pen tishkach et Adonai Elohecha, lest you forget the Lord your God. Levil tishmor mitzvotav. As a consequence, you will not guard his commandments, umishpatav, and his statutes, the chukotav. I suppose we could say mishpatav, ordinances, chukotav, his statutes. So remember the difference between a mishpat and a chok, right? A mishpat would probably cover general laws that are there for the sake of the security of a community. And the chukim are those laws such as kashrut and Shabbat, which tend to be there simply in my understanding is there are opportunities for us to demonstrate our love of our supreme commander and our creator. So, Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayom, which I command you today. And by the way, there's this sense of Hayom, today, meaning that we should, even though we're reading this, how many millennia after these words were actually spoken, written, etc., that we should treat them as if they were just given today, that they're not out of date, they're not old, they're as relevant today as they ever were. I'm going to check and see there's no Rashi on any of these passages. Pen tochal v'savata. He is now, this is also very important elements of human nature. This is a real issue spiritually. Pen lest tochal v'savata. You eat and you are satisfied. Uvatim tovim tivneh. And you build good homes, beautiful homes. V'yashavta, and you dwell in those homes. Uvekarcha, and your cattle, uvetzoncha, and your sheep, your flocks, yirbiyun, multiply. V'chesef v'zahav, yirbelach, and silver and gold, you multiply for yourselves. You become very wealthy, right? You prosper. And of course, this is something that is lovely if people enjoy prosperity. B'chol asher lecha, and everything that you possess, yirbeh, multiplies. You have lots of. And here's what happens. V'ram levavecha, and your heart becomes haughty. V'shachachta, and you forget et Adonai Elohecha. You forget the Lord your God. You have to ask yourselves the question, has he nailed human psychology? Hamotziacha, who takes you out, Be'eretz Mitzrayim, from the land of Egypt, Mi Beit Avadim, from the house of bondage. And again, on the very pshat level, we could say, the what have you done for me lately syndrome, that we realize that had we never left Egypt and were still slaves. But I also strongly, strongly feel that it is talking metaphorically and saying that Moses is telling them that by adopting the Torah and the values of the Torah, we can escape the slavery within ourselves. So that's going to happen because you become so prosperous and you have so many lovely things, right? And again, there are a lot of parenthetical phrases here, so we got to hold on to this original idea, right? Be careful in case you become prosperous and you then forget about God. And you start to gain a lot of confidence. So again, describing God, Hamolochecha Bamidbar Hagadol, who takes you in this great and awesome wilderness, Nachash, snakes, saraf, venomous serpents, va'akrav, scorpions, v'tzimaon, thirst, asher ein mayim, in that there is no water, hamotzi lecha mayim, who brings out water for you, mitzur hachalamish, from the flinty rock. Again, I feel this is speaking metaphorically, but this is talking about, remember, Moses is saying to them, don't forget what God has done for you and these amazing things. And of course, I think this ties in so beautifully with Heschel's concept of radical amazement. And that is that if you seriously and carefully think about the reality that surrounds us, how vast and great and awesome it really is, and the fact that we understand so little of it really, that we can understand it empirically, that is experientially on a certain level, but it hardly gives us a full understanding. All we really do is scratch the surface. And this awareness here, this, if we understand this metaphorically, how God is taking us through this wilderness. Hama'achilcha, man, who fed you manna, bamidbar, in the wilderness, asher lo yadun avotecha, which your ancestors never experienced, leman anotcha, in order to cause you hardship, uleman nasorcha, and we had this idea before, right? In order to test you, the heitivcha ba'acharitecha. This is really beautiful, right? In order to do well for you in your end, in the end. In other words, it's the very basis, as I've mentioned this a number of times before, my late mom's proverb, when is the beggar happy? When he finds the thing he lost, right? In other words, going through adversity is such a profound experience because it helps us appreciate stuff that we take for granted. So, and also to look at the adversity that we face with a different kind of heart and to have confidence that somehow or other it is all going to be for the best. And we know that there are stories in the Talmud and the Midrash, right, about Gamzu Latova. This too is for the good, and trying to have that. And I realize, this doesn't mean that one doesn't have to try, when you're empowered, to bring justice to a situation that you aren't, you don't have that responsibility. And we were speaking before the recording started as to why Moses was chosen, and he had, having social responsibility to the degree that you have it, doing everything you can. So those are all parenthetical phrases, and this next sentence is following the sentence about lest you forget and your heart become haughty. Va'amarta bilvavecha, and you think in your hearts, right? You say to yourself, Kochi, my power, the otzam yadi, and the strength of my hand, asali et hachayil hazeh, has created all this strength, right? Forgive me, humanism. And that's what it's saying. To think as human beings that we actually gave ourselves all this ability, power, good fortune, etc., right? But please forgive me, I'm going to have to mute someone.
I don't,
Yeah, go ahead.
that characterization of humanism does not strike me well.
I understand. Well, my understanding of humanism is it's saying it's all up to human beings, that God doesn't exist. That's my understanding. Maybe we have different understandings. But to my understanding of humanism is saying that everything essentially, that the human being is the ultimate value in the world. And it's not just saying the idea of human beings being created in the divine image. It goes beyond that. It's a denial of any divine element in the world, in existence.
I think choice.
Sorry, Harlan, just unmute, please. Go ahead, unmute, please.
I think choice comes in too. You can either do good or do bad. That's your choice. Moses is trying to say that.
Yeah, but he's saying more than that. He is saying, what's so interesting is here in the Torah, right? We tend to think of agnosticism and atheism as being modern, as being relatively modern thinking, as part of modern thinking, and we think of, the idea of believing in a divine creator, something that's transcendent, as being old-fashioned and basically atavistic. And here we are in the Torah talking exactly about atheism. So Judith, I'm not trying to insult the humanistic values that clearly are there within Judaism. Maybe I should have said atheism. And believe me, I am, that if I don't want to say anything that is perceived as insulting, and if I need to be corrected, please feel free to correct me. Okay, but that's what he's talking about. V'zacharta, but you should remember, et Hashem Elokecha, the Lord your God, ki hu hanoten, that God is the one, hanoten lecha koach, who provides you with the strength, who empowers you, right, la'asot chaya, to be able to amass wealth. Laman hakim et bito, and also in order to establish his covenant, asher nishba la'avotecha, which he swore to your ancestors, kayom hazeh, like this day, as on this day. So, challenging words. Judith, please, I don't want to cut you off. If you want to add, please feel free. And if I understood.
Well, I don't quite know, but you know how in some families you learn that you do not ask certain questions. We do not discuss this in our family, but
Yes.
nobody says that outright.
Yes.
My father told me that he became a rabbi in order to preach socialism from the pulpit.
Yes.
That is not what he ended up doing, but and he started studying in Boston with Soloveitchik, and Soloveitchik said, Hellman, go to New York. And he went to a non-denominational, it was JIR before it was HUCJIR.
Right.
So he's 75 years old when I asked him if he believes in God. And he said, well, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have asked you to define your terms. Because 5 years ago, I was still a pulpit rabbi. But now that I'm retired, I will just say that I'm a humanist. And I believe in the part of the human spirit that sacrifices, that protects, that defends, that creates, that loves, that has values and purpose. And when I am praying and teaching and reading about God, that's what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
And that is, fairly humble position and speaks of values and intention. I have found that very useful to know because in being bar and bat mitzvah teacher for 30 years, I'm dealing with 12-year-olds who tell me, I don't believe in God, I believe in science.
Mhm.
And it forms the basis for a discussion of something bigger. It's so, our higher power, God, whichever version that we respond to or versions is, so much beyond us. The way that an adult has to speak to a 2-year-old, with that difference, the words have to be carefully done. The context has to deal with a 2-year-old mind, not an adult mind. Compared to that, how, different is our normal plane of existence from that of God? It just seems a very good place to start. And it may be that, you're talking about the Enlightenment and what humanism became. It may be a application or a branch of that is used to entrench atheism and anti-godness. It may be that it works the way you do, but I don't think that's what's essential to it. Or maybe I'm just responding to how valuable it was for me to hear this from my father,
Right.
who
Okay,
basically was a Talmudist. Yeah.
Can I say something?
go ahead.
Thank you. Judith, first of all, I want to say amen to your father. Awesome. And I did look up humanism, and it's now defined as an outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. Humanist beliefs stress the potential value and goodness of human beings, emphasize common human needs, and seek solely rational ways of solving human problems. And um, with that, it seems like kindness and compassion and inclusion, all of those things, um, dialogue with each other. And it doesn't have to be in God speak, which is too broad. It brings it back to um, to supporting human values of goodness, compassion, loving kindness as we share Judaism with each other. That's my understanding also of what a humanist is.
Thank you. I appreciate this. So I want to say something that supports, I want to give you a source that supports what both of you are saying. And that is one of my absolute favorite stories where Hillel is asked, what is the Torah? To teach Torah on one foot. And he says, what is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. The rest is commentary. And one thing we can notice in the context of this conversation is it doesn't say anything about God.
Mhm.
It just says, so if we're talking about humanistic values, especially in the way that you defined it, Lisa, but also Judith, in how I understand, you're sharing what your late father was trying to emphasize. This is all consistent with, what is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. And of course, he goes on to say, Hillel does go on to say, the rest is commentary, go study, go study. So studying is very important. And I do, and Judith, your point about, where we are in terms of our mental capacities is beautiful too, and very helpful. All right. So I'm so glad that both of you have commented and corrected my initial statement regarding this. I was thinking of humanism more in terms of the element of it which denies the value and which outright denies the value of transcendent thinking. And part of my understanding of, again, Lisa, you've heard me say this so many times, right? That when we do God talk, right, when we speak about God, we're talking about trying to understand our relationship to the universe. And this much, pretty much, I think certainly most Western adults can understand is how tiny we are and how insignificant we are in regards to the entire universe. And trying to speak in terms of a transcendent God is our attempt, feeble as it might be, to discover what is significant about our lives in a more general way than simply its relationship to other human beings. But I also truly accept the correction and the need to be careful because there is no question that the Torah contains many, and is founded on humanistic values. And that statement, what is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor, is essentially a humanistic statement. So I'm going to pause a second just in case either of you want to add, or anyone else wants to add any other comment before we move on.
I just want to say thank you.
Of course, I think that's part of the value too, is that, that we're open to hearing, even if maybe we have some differences, and even if we have some differences of understanding, but to know that as an entity, right, as a corporate group, you might say, that there's so much, it adds to our understanding. And I love the statement also within the tradition that says, Ein HaTorah nikneit ela b'chavruta. It says, Torah is not acquired except with companionship. So, you could say, Dayenu, for the example of a conversation we just had. And hopefully I'm going to take it with me into the future as well. Right. Let's go a little bit further, if we may. Again, I want to make sure we're not, okay. Right, we still don't have any Rashi, but we can finish this chapter. V'haya im shachoach tishkach et Hashem Elokecha. So it's not whatever you like is fine. It shall be, it certainly will be, if you absolutely forget Hashem Elokecha, the Lord your God, v'halachta acharei Elohim acherim, and you go after other gods. So I'll finish the sentence, but I do want to make a point. V'avadatam, and you serve them, v'hishtachavita lahem, and you bow down to them. Of course, bowing down is a metaphoric way of saying serving them, serving the values, serving what those gods stand for. Ha'idoti bachem hayom, I witness against you today, or I witness before you today, ki avod tovedun, that you will surely perish. I'll finish this up because we've got one more sentence. Kagoyim, now this is important. Like the nations, asher Hashem ma'avid mipnechem, which the Lord is destroying before you. Kain tovedun, you yourselves will perish. Ekev lo tishma'un, because you do not hearken, you did not listen, Bekol Hashem Elokechem, within the voice, you did not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. So here's the thing, here's the conundrum. If we don't worship God, if we don't understand this or try to relate in this transcendent way, what is then the choice? This is not an empty thing. You wind up serving something, because that is the nature of living a life and living a human life. In other words, we all have priorities. We all do. You can't live without them. And the question becomes, let's look deeply into ourselves and try to sort out what is our greatest priority. And you could say that greatest priority, notice, right? It's not like one thing and nothing else. Priority is what we worship. And of course, there are very simple examples that we could give. So someone who devotes, how do you spend your time? How do you enjoy spending your time? Where do your thoughts tend to lead you, right? What is it that you want? Ask yourself these sorts of questions, right? And if in trying to understand what it is to relate to Adonai Elohecha, right? To see what significance there is in life in trying to relate in that way. And of course, I'm speaking in very broad terms because each one of us, with our own unique intelligence, our own unique talents and abilities, our own unique family histories and experiences, within that broad category, can find ways to do this. But I would say that as Jews, as members of the Jewish people, that the one function of those mitzvot, right, is something that can unite us, that brings us together. We are all, if you're in this class, you are saying to yourself, studying Torah is a priority. It may not be the greatest priority, but it is a priority. And I think that's an important point to make. And I'm going to stop right now, but I'll stop the share and also give you a chance to comment if you'd like.
I've
Yeah.
got something. I was doing a search, and I come up with, we believe we believe in a God who inhabits this world and especially the human heart. God is the source of our generosity, sensitivity, and concern for the world around us. God is also the power within us that urges us towards self-fulfillment and ethical behavior. We find God when we look for meaning in the world, when we are motivated towards study, and when we work to realize the goals of morality and social justice. And I think a lot of the people in this group would say, oh, yeah, it's Reconstructionist. I wasn't surprised, but but I think that could be where that's where American Jews who have had a certain level of social justice stuff and liberals, I guess. I don't know. But I thought that was quite interesting
It
because
is.
that's kind of what Judith and Lisa are saying is how they feel. And me, I know I'm more Reconstructionist than anything else whenever I take one of those quizzes. It's like,
Right. So, of course, I want you to know, for the sake of transparency, my late mother loved Reconstructionism. Had she had anything, and of course, it was a philosophy developed by Mordecai Kaplan, right? And incidentally, Reconstructionism is an outgrowth of the left wing, you might say, of conservative Judaism. It represents the left wing. I don't have time right now to explain why I'm not satisfied with that, although it's Reconstructionism itself, by the way, has gone through various development in its history. It's relatively brief history, but that would have to be for another reason and another time. Okay.
For
So,
transparency, I
yes.
must confess that for 14 years, starting in 1989, I was a chazan for a Reconstructionist synagogue.
Yes.
Makes sense, huh?
It does, and it's understandable. Yeah. The first rabbi I worked for, Bernie Raskus, conservative congregation, he and his wife were essentially Reconstructionists, even though the synagogue was not formally considered Reconstructionist. So it's interesting. It's a whole
I
other.
think that could be why a lot of people are turned off to the three streams, that they're turned off because they don't get to see that that's possible within conservative, that idea of God being more part of us and not just out there somewhere.
Right, but that's
Yes.
exactly where I have the problem. That's exactly where I have the
Really?
problem. Absolutely. I believe we are in God, not the other way around. We either let
I
God
think
in
it's
or we
both.
don't.
I mean, it's both because God is everywhere.
Well,
So
I'm not
how
okay.
can God be everywhere and not also within us?
I didn't say that God wasn't, okay, but
Right.
it's allowing
But
the other.
that's how we can experience God.
I'm going to let
That's
you.
how we experience God is within ourselves and by the things we do because of our choices that we make.
I
So,
won't go on.
right.
I'm going to have to
Rabbi.
let you end. Yes.
Rabbi, I love that. I haven't ever heard you say that before. Thank you.
What's that? I'm sorry. What did you not hear me say? I'm going to let you have the last word.
Okay, about God, that we are in God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But to
I
be
love
to
that.
be continued. To be continued. Okay.
Thank
All right.
Always.
Take care. Of course. Take care. Bye bye.
Have a minion.
Oh, we
Oh.
do. Okay. I'm going to stop
Not
the recording.
anymore.